Hello and welcome to Kingston Now. I'm Jimmy Buff. This week we'll meet Holly Shelowitz and learn about her company, Nourishing Wisdom, and what it takes to eat well. Holly will then cook something good for us and nourishing too, and it'll be our first cooking segment ever on Kingston Now. First, though, we start with Brian Hollander, who provides a different type of nourishment each week with the Woodstock Times. Hi, Brian. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy. How you doing?
You are the editor of the Woodstock Times. A few months back, we had the publisher, Getty
Svekauskas.
I've been practicing for days. He's the publisher. The difference between a publisher and an editor is the publisher is sort of the business guy, and you're the content guy.
Well, the publisher can be the business guy. In Getty's case, he kind of spans both worlds, and a lot of publishers do that. More publishers in the newspaper business come from the business side than from the editorial side. But the publisher is the guy who oversees the entire operation, which is not just news gathering and putting out newspapers. It has to do with the sales staff. It has to do with production. It has to do with scheduling. It has to do with keeping the business afloat, basically, which we know in these days is not an easy task.
It is not, and Getty has not only managed to keep the Woodstock Times afloat, but he's expanded into other towns with Ulster Publishing.
40 years now Woodstock Times has been publishing, and it was a great anniversary about a year ago we had. And New Paltz Times and Kingston Times and Saugerties Times, and of course Almanac is the arts and entertainment section. That's a powerhouse, and it goes inside all of them and gets distributed by itself too. So there's really 5 publications that we work on, that we put out.
And when did you come on board as editor?
I've been editor of Woodstock Times for 12 years, since 2001. And
I know you had your start certainly in broadcast, because you were one of the original staff members of the radio station I work at now, WDST.
Yep, WDST.
The town of Woodstock is such an interesting mosaic to cover, right? You've got all these incredible characters and issues. What is your sort of editorial mandate when it comes to putting out a weekly newspaper there?
It chronicles the life of a community, which means that there's got to be a lot of input from the community. You know, we've got a huge letters to the editor section that's really vibrant and lively, and we don't put it online. You have to pick up the newspaper to be part of that conversation.
The issues in a small town like Woodstock could sometimes seem to be, kind of mundane, but weekly it seems that there are really valid things to cover in the town that actually have implications that go beyond the boundaries of Woodstock, that reflect, what's going on in the country and the world at large.
Woodstock fights the same battles that any town does, the battles of people figuring out how to get along with one another. Whether it be who should have health care in the country, or whether it should be where you build your septic tank, and is it too close to my well? Things like that. Those are the things that people deal with everywhere. So it's a microcosm of everything of the world. It's a little bit. It tends to be a little bit freer in terms of the expression of the people. People want to make themselves heard and make themselves known in Woodstock, and that's a wonderful trait. I think that's a great thing.
The paper's been around for 40 years. You've been in Woodstock for a long time yourself.
Yeah, about
How
that.
have you seen the town change, and how has the paper reflected that?
It's a very interesting thing to look at the town these days. It looks very similar. When I came to Woodstock in about 1973, for one thing, there was no cable television then. There was no cable television, there weren't DWI laws, and everybody had to go out to be entertained at night. And so it was kind of a rip-snorting, fighting, brawling, artistic...
Frontier-type town, huh?
Frontier-type town.
Yeah.
It was that kind of crazy place, and people who came there and stayed there enjoyed it and liked it. And I think that a lot of us actually just stayed there and got older, and we're still there, and we don't go out as much anymore. Now we have cable television.
And the newspaper has shifted just to cover that influx, in addition to the people who were here 40 years ago and are here now, and who have more issues that are probably more more appropriate to a 55-year-old or a 60-year-old, like taxes and where I can put my septic tank versus, whatever's happening culturally. With a whole influx of second homeowners, too.
Oh, and the important thing that I like to make sure that they get a little slice of is the history of the town. I like to make sure that they understand that they knew what took place, where were the original sound outs that led to there were the genesis of the Woodstock Festival, where, you know, who was involved with the clubs. What were the clubs like in those days? Where there was music going on all the time. Where were they and who played there, and how did this sensibility arise of this community as an artistic community? And that means going back also and looking at all the painters who were the generation before the musicians. From the 1900s to the 1960s, it was, aside from being a working man's town and going way back and being a glass-blowing town, aside from that, it became an artist's community, a painter's community. So the history is really important to keep it current in the newspaper also. We have a series of the lives of the painters, where we talk about who they were and what they did and how they got to Woodstock.
Regularly, I pick up the Woodstock Times, and I'm just so impressed by the journalism that's done, as well as the writing itself. And I think I want to end with just a compliment to one of your writers, Tad Wise, who wrote an obituary for an iconic Woodstock resident, Peter Walther, who died a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And if anyone, they can find this obituary online. I know it's posted online, I checked. But if anyone wants to see the value of a community newspaper and how it represents the people who live there, they should read that obituary. Great work from Tad.
But he does some other great work too. He just wrote a wonderful interview with a longtime Woodstock lawyer who was retiring, and he's also been responsible for the Lives of the Painter series. But we have some other fine journalists. Violet Snow is a wonderful journalist. Paul Smart writes some great things.
And you do.
And I'm the editor, so I'm the chief cook and bottle washer. When something needs to be written, I'm the guy who goes out and does it.
Well, you're doing a terrific job.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks for being here, Brian.
Yep.
You're watching Kingston Now. Next, we talk good, healthy food choices in preparation with Holly Shelowitz of Nourishing Wisdom. Welcome back to Kingston Now. Holly Shelowitz is a culinary nutrition counselor and real food educator. For over 15 years, through client sessions, cooking classes, and educational events, Holly's been inspiring people to get into their kitchens and cook. Welcome to the show, Holly.
Thank you.
Now, a nutritional counselor and a real food educator. Tell me about those.
So there's food and there's real food. And as a nutrition educator, I love to help people understand how to find a way of eating that really works well for their body. And in these busy times that we're in, a lot of people are eating out a lot and forget about veggies or other nutrient-dense foods to add into their diets. And as a real food educator, I help to inspire people to just how to incorporate nourishing, healthy foods every day, even if you are eating out, that there are certain ways to order, but really my mission is to get people in the kitchen.
Now, I've actually seen images of you in supermarkets with a workshop in tow.
Absolutely.
And you're really on the front lines then. You're set, so it's like processed cheese, Velveeta, not real food. Vegetables, real food.
Yes,
right?
and yes, definitely vegetables, and it's not necessarily only vegetarian or vegan per se, but it is about eating real foods in their natural state.
And when you say natural state, you mean no processing, no treatment whatsoever?
Well, processing is such a funny word, right? So it can be, I would say when I say real foods in their natural state, certainly anything out of the garden, anything from our local farmers markets. Of course, there is some processing involved, like if you buy a can of beans, that's technically processed, but it's still a whole food. So the process part, I think, gets people confused. It's more about keeping it simple and keeping it whole.
How real is the possibility of people eating mostly real food in this day and age?
Thankfully, I think it's real. I think it's really possible because people are not feeling well, and they're realizing how what they eat directly affects how they feel. And whether it's because they're ill, or everyone has had the experience of eating something and either getting a headache or a stomach ache right away. Certainly sugar has that impact, although, we're all hooked into sugar. So I'm not suggesting that sugar is terrible, but I am saying that it's really easy to know when you decide to tune in to see how you feel when you're eating a certain way.
How much of people's relationship with food do you address in some of your nutritional counseling sessions? You know, people eat when they're sad, when they're mad. They eat thoughtlessly, unconsciously.
A lot. I teach something called understanding what you eat and understanding what you're hungry for. And so on one aspect, I teach people how to have their plate be a nutrient-dense plate as often as possible. Ideally, since we have to eat at least 3 times a day, at least 365 days a year, it would be really great to know how to do that in a way that really serves us. And to what you said about the emotional aspects and something that I call food as entertainment and as, we'll say, medication versus medicine, is food isn't designed for that. Food is really designed to nourish us, and there's amazing pleasure in that nourishment, and certainly the creativity that's involved in the kitchen or in choosing and in storing and preparing the foods. One of the things that I teach very specifically in my practice is a very strong focus on self-care, which means that if someone notices that they're eating chocolate at night, every night, like right before getting into bed. I have a number of clients that do that. It's not uncommon. And, but they're not really hungry for that. They're hungry for something else. I do something called dissecting cravings. So we're looking
Which that's a craving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it could be physical, it could be emotional, and I believe that they
It
can
feels
also
so
be
physical, though.
I know. And absolutely.
Right.
And there are physiological cravings too, which I cover a whole curriculum in my nutrition counseling practice with my clients about really understanding what food is and why we feel a certain way and why we're particularly craving something. So for example, let's say someone craves sugar every day, and it's not unusual to have somebody really crave something sweet. A lot of times, yeah, we might be wanting something sweet, but underneath that, maybe we're not drinking enough water. Maybe we're not sleeping enough or well. And so our body's call for energy start to look like a sweet craving. And a lot of times if someone's drinking coffee and drinking other kinds of stuff other than just water, many people are dehydrated and they start to feel a little wonky and out of it and then reach for coffee, chocolate, or sugar during the day to like lift the energy up. And so that's a big piece of what I help to show people is to just slow down and start to identify what we're doing just out of automatic habit.
I am challenged when it comes to making food, to food preparation, and
You're not alone.
we're so excited because we've actually never done a cooking segment here on the show, and we're going to do that next. So hang out with us,
Fantastic.
okay?
Definitely.
This is Kingston Now. Next, we cook with Holly. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Kingston Now. We're joined again by Holly Shelowitz, a culinary nutrition counselor and real food educator. And Holly, the studio has never smelled this good before. What are we going to make
Fantastic.
right now?
We are going to saute some greens in some coconut oil with some walnuts, raisins, and a little fennel.
And now, would this be considered a lunch dish, a dinner?
It could be a meal if you add some more protein to it, perhaps some chicken or beans or some feta cheese, then it could absolutely be a meal. Or something when you're in the mood to just have something light and green and vital.
Great. Well, let's fire up that pan.
Okay.
And then notice that we've got the kale is already chopped, and we've got the ingredients nicely set out. I don't think it would ever look like this in my kitchen, but you're the pro.
I'm the pro.
So coconut oil.
Yes, we are using some coconut oil today because it's something that people are starting to hear a lot more about. And I think it's a wonderful nourishing fat, and it also is a great oil to cook with because it has a high heat point. And it also adds a little bit of coconut flavor, which is nice. But mostly, with olive oil, which we all use to saute, it's actually better to use olive oil to drizzle on your salad and to drizzle on your food and not necessarily heat it to high temperatures. That's where coconut oil is ideal. Ghee is also really nice to use in this way as well.
And it's heating up nicely. And now we've got 2 different kinds of kale here.
Yes, we have curly kale, which is the most common. And I love to show people how to cook with it because a lot of times if they haven't made it before or if they've eaten it, it gets confusing. So I'm going to actually have you take the stem right out, and then we can cut it in really small pieces, or rip it in this case. And the reason why we do that is a lot of times if you don't want to cook it for too long, the stem is a little woodier and a little more dense, and so I actually save the stems and chop them fine and add them to my soups and longer cooking things.
Ah, good repurposing.
Yes.
And the other kale
And
is?
the other kale is lacinato kale. It's also called dinosaur kale, and because of the really nice texture, the ribby texture that it has. It's a little greener, so both kinds of kale are absolutely healthy and nourishing for us, but when they're, the darker the better. And so for this one, the stem isn't as woody, and I just chop it really fine and add it right in. And I saved us some time by just taking care of it ahead of time. I'm going to add in some garlic. Always a good beginning.
It is. It scents the air beautifully.
That's right.
Tells you something good is cooking.
Yeah. And of course, you can start with some onions as well if you prefer, but garlic just really enhances the whole dish so beautifully. And it tends to burn, so we're only going to leave it in here for a few minutes before I add the greens to it.
Okay. Oh, I can see it browning already.
Yeah. So the thing about kale that a lot of people, we're all hearing about kale, right? It's all about kale, 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 which is great because it really is a truly nourishing food. And because all of these dark greens have so much nutrition, high in calcium, magnesium, zinc, and the green part is chlorophyll. And that is literally the blood of the plants that nourishes our blood. And so in my nutrition practice with my clients and in all of my classes, I am always talking about greens because they're just such an important food, and it's easy to not eat enough of them.
And flavoring for the kale, in addition to its own natural taste, is going to come from the other ingredients.
Yes, and in fact, it definitely needs nutrition support. Whoops, one got away. It definitely needs flavor. And so it's like when you use spinach or any other green, they're going to need flavor. So the garlic is in there for that. I'm going to use a little bit of fine-grained Celtic sea salt, and I really love using this particular kind of fine-grained salt because it adds minerals to the food as you're eating it. The other thing about greens that are really important is when you're cooking them, is to just make sure to cook them well so that they're a little tender, and to also make sure that they're being cut in small pieces. Because a lot of times, if you get a piece like this on your fork, people get really turned off and scared, and they'll never eat greens again, right?
So to eat a bush for dinner.
Exactly.
It's much more appetizing when it's smaller.
Yeah.
And what goes next?
So we're going to add a little bit of fennel seed, which adds a really nice, kind of like a licorice flavor. And you could see all of the greens that I put in here cooked down a lot. And so even though you start out with a big mountain of greens, they'll reduce, and suddenly you'll be like, okay, I need more. So definitely you can use a whole bunch or two, depending on who you're cooking for and how many people. And now we really you can see how it's really beginning to
Indeed, yeah, it's
get
already,
small.
yeah,
And I just want to check our flame here. Great. And so I'm going to add a little bit of chicken stock. You can use vegetable stock or even water. And this will kind of help to steam saute it. So it's going to it'll allow it to start steaming, but also be sauteing it. And then at the end, we'll be finishing it off with some roasted walnuts and raisins, which make everybody happy because a lot of times if people aren't used to eating greens, and they can have a slightly bitter flavor if you're not used to them. So by adding the raisins, it sweetens it up, adding the fennel, it sweetens it up, and then the toasted walnuts add great flavor and also crunch.
And time-wise, this is really not that hard to do. Preparation isn't that
quick.
challenging. I mean, it's something that someone who is challenged in the kitchen as I am could easily do.
You could easily do, and really that's my mission, is to get us all into the kitchen, because as healthy as we eat and as good food as we can get outside, there's something really magical and also healing about preparing our food And keeping it simple, you could see all of these ingredients are really simple. They're available everywhere. And it could take under 10 minutes.
And it smells great already.
Great.
So how about we taste this?
Sounds great. I'm going to add a couple of finishing touches to this. I really love adding toasted nuts. I'm on a toasted walnut bender right now. I'm just loving them. And so we're just going to add, it really adds great flavor. And these are raisins. I'm using unsulfured light raisins, but you can use any raisins. You can also use apples or pears. And then once everything is ready, which is just about now, you always want to taste and make sure that they're tender so that you're not, like you said, chewing incessantly. All right, you want to be my taste tester?
I'm ready.
Let me make sure to give you some good.
There we go.
Okay. And then right here, if you crumbled in some feta cheese or some other cheese, that's a meal. And if you wanted to add chicken or fish or shrimp to this, you would add it with the garlic. And then you have your meal. 15 minutes, done.
Oh yeah, I could eat this every day.
Excellent.
That's really great. Terrific.
Good.
Thank you, Holly.
You're very welcome.
That's it for this week's show. Thanks to Brian Hollander of the Woodstock Times. Find them online at woodstocktimesx.com. And thanks again to Holly Shelowitz. For her information online, go to nourishingwisdom.com. All of our previous shows are available on our YouTube channel, and you can find that link on our Facebook page. For Kingston Now, I'm Jimmy Buff. We'll see you next time.